It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
All right, we're a couple minutes late on our normal start time here because we had to compensate. Obviously. Last week being 15 minutes early. This week we're 8 minutes late. So I think that just kind of means, after a while we'll even it up. It's like snow days, right, Mark? It's like snow days for school. Don't they do that? Like they'll like work extra after they take a snow day.
Or maybe
I'm not talking about college. I'm talking about like you've got kids in school, right?
Yeah. There's occasionally snow days. It's been unseasonably warm this winter season.
True.
But so I don't even know what a snow day is anymore.
That's true. There's not been a whole lot of snow days, but like I remember it used to be like if you took a lot, then you'd have to work through some normal holidays to recover. It would be a snow day, makeup day, or something like that. So same thing with start time. We've used 8 minutes of the 15 that we booked last week, so we've got a few minutes that we can use in the future. So
all I know is about the schools, they build in so many snow days that if they don't use them up, then they have to like just start taking days off on their own.
Do they really do that?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, because they plan the school year with the snow days.
I don't know. I was just thinking about. I'm surprised at how many like there's occasionally like a Monday or Friday my daughters have off school just for I guess it was like the last one was President's Day, but then they had like a Friday off too. It was like I don't know. I don't understand their schedule and like what the schools do. Like
Was the Friday like Christmas Eve, Mark?
I don't know.
It was. You weren't quite sure. So,
but I'm feeling good about our show because now that we, like I said, we started early last week, we started late this week. So what I look at, we're reverting back to the mean, Tim.
Our
mean of no preparedness.
No, there's zero preparation. But there's been some things that have come up, and I thought it would behoove us to address the elephant in the room. And well, speaking of elephants, Mark, one thing we didn't talk about is, and it's not the elephant, I should say. I think it's the elephant in the room because I think that's how you spell ELE or how you pronounce ELEPHPANT. Because that's the PHP elephant. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, I'm so familiar with it. I've never received one, which I'm waiting for my PHP elephant because apparently, they just give them away at these conferences, and you should just be grabbing one for me.
I should be grabbing one for you?
Yes, as a friend, you should definitely. Even though I haven't used PHP like in 20 years,
I will do it.
Maybe if I had a nice, cute little elephant on my desk, I would be encouraged to use it a bit more.
I will have to see what I can do to get you an elephant.
Actually, I did have one. I don't know. I might have lost the fire, unfortunately. I think I did remember. Maybe with Leah Tech Days. I think from the hackathons or something like that.
One. Yeah,
I think you did. I think I snatched one from one of our events that we did in the past. So, but I don't have it anymore. So, yep.
Well, here's the thing. First of all, we didn't talk, and we'll get to the elephant. We'll get to the elephant in a second, I think. But we didn't talk about your New Year's resolutions because I don't use New Year's resolutions, right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
But we didn't talk about your New Year's resolutions. But what I have a never-ending list of things that I've started but not finished, right? And I think Mark, that's probably true for you.
Don't we all?
So here's an idea that's been in my head. Speaking of elephants, is a kid's book. You ready for this? Mark?
Mm-hmm.
A kid's book about Ella the elephant, right? With the PHP elephant. Here's the thing. We open it with this idea that she was very different from regular elephants, right? Because what are elephants known for, Mark? What are they known for?
They're known to be very big and very slow.
Well, there's that, but I mean, what's the thing? What do they say? They say an elephant. What? An elephant?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You can't complete that.
No.
An elephant.
I cannot.
An elephant never forgets, Mark.
Oh, it never forgets.
And yes, because elephants are supposed to remember things for a very long time, right? Like normal elephants.
So is that why PHP is a single process?
Well, that's
system
the
where
thing.
like it's just gonna like remember. It
forgets
every time.
We have this PHP, this elephant, right? Ella the elephant, and she's different because normal elephants remember things for a very long time, but Ella the elephant, Ella the elephant, she forgets everything right away. So she's a really good listener, always does what she's told, but she's very literal. That means she does exactly what someone said and not exactly what they meant, right? And we introduce kids to programming with this idea of this elephant that is Very literal. You can't just be like, oh, she'll understand. No, because you and I know that with code. Computers are very literal, right? You're like, I obviously didn't mean that, but the computer did that, right? And then, of course, once she's done doing whatever you ask her, she forgets it right away. So we build up this character in this like kids book about Ella the elephant, and then we talk about, I don't know, put in scenarios, and then, well, because Ella forgets everything right away, let's write it down. And then we start exploring some syntax and like, well, we got to remember things, right? So let's just use this to represent I don't know how many of a thing we want, and maybe we could call it a variable. I don't know. So that's my idea. What do you think, Mark? What do you think? Can we do?
I
can we
think
do
it
a
does have
introduction
some
to PHP
promise.
Kids
I'm
book?
just wondering, who is the market for this book?
Who is the market?
Who's the target market? Who are you trying to go after? Are you trying to go after
Oh, now you're gonna get all businessy on me.
former PHP developers you want to bring back to the fold, or are you trying to target this towards kids?
No,
that you're trying to get them into programming.
This is teaching kids the idea.
Because I think there could be a lot of former
programming.
PHP developers who would really love a kids book.
You really
read
think so?
to read
You
on the
think
spare
bring
time.
Bring them back in. Bring them back
Why
in and be
not?
like, I remember that language.
Because
yeah,
PHP
and now there's
developers-
a colorful illustrated book about it.
They're so efficient. They have so much extra time, and I'm sure they just love to pick up children's books every now and then to kind of fill the time.
I feel like you're mocking me here. I feel like there's some mockery going on here.
Well, I do like this idea. I think it could definitely be a cute character. I could see kids being drawn to it and being engaged with it, and I could see that.
Just got to spend some time with Midjourney describing this elephant and having it drawn.
I know
right?
you could definitely do that, and hopefully you won't get sued after it. But I think then, yeah, you could definitely use Midjourney to.
Yeah, there's that. So that's okay. So that's my elephant story. But I think the prudent thing to do though is because there's been lots of questions, obviously, lots of questions.
Mm-hmm.
We keep getting asked. I don't know why we keep getting asked, Mark, but there's lots of questions we keep getting asked. Is this podcast sponsored by PHP Tech? And I just want to be clear, it's not. It is not at all.
Well, they're not paying for me to go to PHP Tech, so I know it's not sponsored by PHP Tech.
Yeah. This podcast is not at all sponsored by PHP Tech. I mean, I know some people may think that because I'm keynoting the opening of it, so you may think.
Look at you.
You may think that
Pimping
it's sponsored.
your status.
But no. That wasn't shameless self-promotion. That was me just trying to explain why some people might think that this is sponsored by PHP Tech, but it's not. It's definitely not sponsored by, because if it was, Mark, if it was sponsored by PHP Tech,
I'd probably be using PHP then.
Well, you might be using PHP, and I think I'd be saying things like the early bird pricing. Did you know that the early bird pricing ends in 2 weeks, Mark?
Oh my gosh.
On a Friday.
If you're getting paid for this and I'm not, then there's something wrong with
that is exactly what I'm saying.
With our agreement here.
Are not getting paid for this.
I'm starting to feel like this is not a 50-50 relationship here, Tim.
There's zero sponsorship dollars coming our way. I don't know why we keep getting these questions. Because if we were, I would be making a big deal about getting early bird tickets before March 10th, because that's when they end. I'd also be telling you, if you want more of a discount, you should tweet at me or direct message me, because I have a discount code that will save you even more on the tickets. But I'm not saying that at all. So I don't know where these questions are coming from. Are you sponsored? Is this episode brought to you by PHP Tech? Of course it's not. Of course it's not, because I haven't done any of those things. So I just wanted to clear that out, make sure that elephant has been addressed. And I think now we can move on to the rest of the program. Wouldn't you say so, Mark?
I'm ready to move on.
You're ready to move on. All right. So, I don't know. Do you have a topic? I do have an actual topic, which is interesting.
I was gonna.
I never come with topics.
Yeah. Well, okay. I don't know. Do you want? How about, since I'm the one who usually suggests the topics, Ben? Why don't you start with yours? And I do have something I wanted to ask you about.
Well, how about you kick that off, because I'm over here subtweeting and stuff like that while I'm.
Well,
trying to
I was
talk,
curious.
so
I was curious because I've gotten back into monorepos again, thinking about some projects, and I was curious because you at your company you use monorepos, right?
Well, I mean, we we have an application that is in one repository, even though it maybe have some different aspects to it. But to be honest, I'm actually in discussions and we're talking about doing some things to bring in an additional dependency and make it part of the monorepo, so it can work together and we can test it all as one thing.
Wait, so you do have one monorepo, but then you have another major repository outside the monorepo. Is that what you just?
We've got a couple of other things that are like ancillary things that I am trying to. We're talking about whether or not we should bring them into one repository, So from a dev perspective, you can just sit down and say, I have one repo, I spin the whole thing up, and it all works, even though there's some different components. So yeah.
So I'm curious about, do you, in your monorepo, is the repository set up with a multi-language, like a poly-language repository? Like, so you have I'm assuming
No.
you have PHP. I'm assuming you have that. Would you also have like client-side JavaScript
Oh yeah, for sure. So to that
within the
extent,
same repo?
and to be clear, we would probably also be defined in some ways as a monolithic app, which has, there from an architectural standpoint, I think I have appetite to make it less monolithic in terms of the application, but I will still want that in a monorepo.
Single
I
code
still want a
base, yeah.
single, because as soon as you start saying, dependencies are one thing, and I think everybody knows what you think about dependencies, but dependencies are one thing. When it's somebody else's code and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to use that because that library is going to help. Oh, there's an update. All right, we'll figure out when we bring it in. It's another thing when you have like a microservice architecture, right? Where you've got a bunch of these little applications that run and they all communicate and they're all kind of interdependent on each other and the contracts between each other. And then you say, well, let's update the contract. Well, now we need to update it in both repo. Make sure everybody that has this as a dependency also pulls that in. And the releases, like, well, you got to release different repositories of code, different applications, different, however you tag your release, however you say this is code at this point in time. Now you have to organize all that and say, well, we better be deploying version 2 or version 3 or whatever at the same time, because they both agree to the new contract. And yeah, there's other ways you can do it where you can say, well, you don't actually deprecate the old contract, especially if it's APIs that you're using to communicate between services. Don't deprecate the old one, just create a new one, and then slowly the services that use it can start using the new one. So yeah, I know I'm painting the worst possible picture, but it is a problem when you have a bunch of microservices that are all in their own standalone repository to have like this compatibility and understand what kind of the version and the releases of your whole orchestration. That can become difficult.
Yeah.
And one way to make it easier is throw it all in a single repository. So you can say at this point in time, at this commit, all of the microservices understand and work together because they're all on the same page.
So
And
about
the
the orchestration side of this. So do you have do you just do like custom build scripts for each project, or then you have like a master build process that calls out the individual build scripts for the sub projects? Like how what does that look like? Because I've been looking at, like, there's systems like Turbo Repo. There's there's a couple ones that exist, and primarily are the ones I'm looking at are JavaScript centric projects. But I could see you could definitely include other applications that might have like a PHP API, and you could definitely script that with, let's say, Node.js to do some type of build process with that if you want to kind of package up and push it out. But how do you kind of manage between your applications the separate builds and then bring them together for your releases?
Well, we do have a very big application that is built kind of as one, but even in that, we have front end assets that are built on their own with their own build process because it's an NPM thing.
Yeah.
There's another build process to get PHP ready to go in a, what I want to say is structured correctly. All of the things that need to be cached, all the things that need to be generated, because for production you generate these class maps and say, okay, make auto loading easy. We're going to analyze some of these files and build some cached resources that make everything load faster, and that's a build process of a shell script of sorts. And I think what you're alluding to is something that we're actually talking about as I advocate for bringing in some what I want to say, some platform dependencies into our main repo, and so we're going to own that too, so it can all work together. And from a developer standpoint, it's just one repo I have to look at and help more of the team own more of the application holistically. Then yes, then you start saying, well, now there's different languages, right? And you have something over here that might be a Java application, something over here that's a C application. How do you manage that? And then there is arguments to be made. On one hand, if those related platform dependencies are very much standalone and very much separate, maybe they don't need to be in the monorepo, because maybe it is basically like you're building a service that, nope, it's all you, and kind of that AWS model where it's very much, this is a storage service. no, we're not going to have a close coupling. You are going to work through an API all the time. And we're never going to be at a point in time where I have my consuming application that influences a change on my the dependency of it, that other service. Nope, it'll change when it changes. If you want to introduce a new feature over here, you better not think that to do that you need to impact the other service. And that's kind of the AWS model, right?
Yeah.
You're going to wait for that the service that you're dependent on to change if somehow that is blocking your future progress. But for our application, there's some of those kind of dependent platform things that are not all just the PHP application, right? Where no, we need to collaborate. Like, to build a new feature, we want close collaboration between those two, because that's just we do. That is the context we live in, and bringing that into makes sense to us. Maybe bringing some of the other ones in that are completely different languages and are very much standalone, maybe it doesn't. And that's actually what we're trying to work through right now. And one of the conversations I had yesterday was exactly how will we build it? And it'd be like our view is different directories for different projects that then inside of that had what you would assume to see in that project. Like, if it's a Java project, you'd have your Maven file for your dependencies, you have your build scripts. PHP, you'd have your composer to bring in your dependencies, you'd have your build scripts there, NPM, same deal, TypeScript, same deal, and you'd build those things kind of separately, but you'd be able to reference them very easily because they're all in the same tree.
So how much do you also use Docker? Do you create like a Docker image out of each application, and then so it provides like a better developer experience, so that when they would download the whole mono repo and they see like these list of applications or services that they need to get running, and
for local dev, for sure.
Yeah.
For local dev, we have
but you don't do that but you don't use containers, like you don't push containers for production purposes.
We want to.
Oh, so you're going that direction. Okay.
We're definitely moving that direction.
Okay.
That I believe is where, from an ops perspective, we want to be, and the value of that is, then what I was saying before about, well, what version is it all on? Can you tie that to this specific commit in a repository? You really can, because you can say, well, this commit was built into this set of Docker images, and I can look out and I can see that's exactly what's on production, as opposed to, well, we told a build script to make an image, like a zip file or a tar or whatever, but then we went out to the box and we extracted it. Okay, did anybody, was anybody on who has access to that box? Did they change some things? Versus a Docker image where you're pretty much like, oh, we're not sure if it's still, was it modified? I don't know, take it up and put it, take it down, put it up again. It's got to be exactly what you built. So yeah, there's to me a lot of benefit to be able to look, and from a deployment standpoint, it's like, oh, want to roll back? Sure, just launch the last Docker image, as containers, and now you rolled it back. If you have a Docker container kind of per build, you can very easily roll back last night's deploy. That's for sure.
I guess it goes back to what we were talking about last week about the infrastructure. Think about distributing between cloud services and thinking of what the operations looks like, and how going to like a multi-cloud environment, especially if you had Docker image, you're just kind of pushing and trying to orchestrate all those together between different services. That would definitely make sense.
Right, from a like decrease your dependency.
Yeah. So if you want to push something to, like, if you do want to have like a multi-cloud environment between, like, let's say AWS or the Node or Azure or whatever, and but the Docker image can kind of keep that streamline in a sense from how the images are running on the containers.
Yeah, you still have from a deployment standpoint, you have the network configuration that in each cloud service provider is going to be different, I'm sure.
Have you guys gotten into any like Kubernetes stuff?
I know our DevOps teams, yeah.
That's something I'm afraid I finally think I've wrapped my head around, using Docker both locally and now.
That's why you wanted all the Raspberry Pis, right? So you could
so I could run like my own personal cloud in my basement. Yeah,
and then figure out how to run Kubernetes on top of that.
But what I just asked you about deploying, because when I was first getting into Docker, I kind of understood it from I could understand from a model of like, okay, we're going to containerize this application and push it to a server and then have it run on that. I understood that model, but then kind of getting from a development standpoint, getting online with that. Now going back to, now I finally feel really comfortable creating an image out of my project, be able to spin that process up in a container. But now thinking about, okay, well, how can I then just take this to push it to, let's say, a Linode instance and kind of streamline that process, just like I would use in the past, like say Google App Engine or Heroku to push my contained applications. But I want to not be tied to a specific system. I don't want to have dependency on a specific cloud system. And having like instances like was it DigitalOcean with their droplets and Linode with their instances, where it could kind of give you that feel of, let's say, a Heroku or Google App Engine, where you can have a contained application and push that to an instance with with a Docker image.
Yeah,
so I'm looking into that. That's where I'm thinking I'm going. Yeah.
Kind of the promise of Docker, right? Like,
yeah,
that you could just, what runs in your computer runs in the cloud, and at that point it can run in any cloud. But again, you're going to have how do you launch it? How do you network it, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you orchestrate the different containers? Kubernetes helps with that for sure. How do you orchestrate it at a higher level for your inbound requests? Because if you're not running a Docker container to do like the load balancing, but you're leveraging something like Elastic Load Balancer or some of those things that are native to whatever that cloud provider is, that's a different story then, right? Then you have to at least know how you're going to configure it, but hopefully your deploy is just push up the image. I mean, but in that, it sounds a little simplistic, and honestly it is, because that's an easy thing to do for an application layer, right? But how are you going to deploy your database?
Yeah.
And how are you going to deploy your database across clouds?
Yeah.
And that becomes a much different discussion.
And then dealing with migrations, everything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because you can run a database in a Docker container. That's fine too, but you still have data, right? There's data that's someplace. Where did you store that data? And if you're running in a multi-cloud environment, how are you replicating that data across your different cloud infrastructures? That's an interesting thing. That's an interesting question, right?
Isn't that the promise of NoSQL? Your data is just kind of distributed.
I'm not sure that's the promise. I'm not sure.
Well, isn't it
just like?
Well, if you build, let's say, on one of the platforms, the cloud hosting platforms like AWS or Google Cloud or Azure with their NoSQL data stores like Bigtable on there with Google's cloud system, they handle the distribution of that, right? So you basically have like this one database system they use, and then they kind of manage the distribution, but you're tied to that system.
Right. And what we were talking about last week was like, can you become infrastructure independent? Where you're like, well, I'm running an AWS and Azure. Well, not if you're using Bigtable, right? Then you're having to somehow tune your application for two different storage backends. That then, how do you even, like, if you wanted to be transparent to your users, that they could be directed either to your AWS infrastructure or your Azure infrastructure. How do you keep that data in sync?
Yeah,
because that's a lot to do. Even if you're running, say, normal database instances, that's a lot to do from a replication standpoint across clouds.
So one thing I wanted to mention, which I don't know if you've taken a look at, because I was looking at other platforms like Firebase that I could kind of start to use, but also use in my classes. Because in my web development class, we're kind of getting into the phase of actually having to build their applications. And I talked about using Replit as kind of like the online IDE. It's very kind of easy, and that has really gotten really built out where like you can run multiple processes on it. You could actually have applications just hosted with like that are always running, and it works pretty well now. So the students, I think that's a good experience. Then providing a good database with that for their applications, and I'm trying to also keep the cost low, like pretty much free, because that's why I like using Firebase, because it's a good service you can start with. It's very low cost, it's pretty much free if you don't have too much traffic. But it's kind of thinking about, well, what is a relational database system I could use, or some type of database system that I could use that could provide that to the students. I found Supabase. Have you ever seen that? Have you heard about this before?
No. What is this?
So Supabase. So they say it's like the open source version of Firebase, but it's interesting how they use PostgreSQL as their database, but you can access it with an API, like you would sort of feels like a NoSQL style interface, like you have with, let's say, a Firestore, or we're talking about these NoSQL kind of API style interfaces. Also has like block storage for data, for images, authentication built into it. But it's interesting too. It says this layer built on top of AWS, which that's also kind of makes me feel like, once you start building top of that, you are kind of building that dependency just on AWS. But it provides a lot of features that are very easy to use. And I love actually just getting started with the database. I was just playing with it because I'm going to start introducing to my students. I can just create a relational database. You can start defining your table with your columns, your relationships, with between the tables, and it gives you an API. You could access that within your application. So and also from a cost standpoint, it's pretty much free. Create a free account, and for just small projects, it's great.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. So it says what does it say? Open source. I thought it said something about open source. Is it?
Well,
Is the
it
code
is
actually
no,
on?
it is yes, it is open source. But it is so I haven't got this to the extent trying to take a look to see if you want to do like a self-hosted version of this. But it does have you can see it the code on GitHub. But it's a service. They're selling the services that's built on top of AWS. But the code base is open source. So you can take a look at it. But I just like the features of like you have like storage, database, authentication. Also, if you want to do some type of edge functions to deploy some type of some scripts or some type of have some small applications on endpoints, you can do that. So I think from a feature set standpoint, which these are all the features I've always loved about Firebase. It just gave you these features just out of the box. They're just easy to use. Or just gave you a straightforward API to access them for, especially dealing with like authentication issues, which as a developer, I feel like I always just was recreating the wheel, and also opening yourself up to errors, trying to make your own authentication system and making sure that that's built properly into your application. So using a service like this always was attracted to me.
I'm looking at it now. Yeah, it looks like you can run on Docker too.
Mhm.
I'm not seeing a hard dependency to AWS.
No, it is. No, if you just
like,
go
but their
their
free
service,
their cloud
yes.
service is
What
dependent on
they're
AWS.
they started with the free accounts, but they do have a pricing model built into it. So once your project gets some traction and get some activity on it, upgrading to their paid version plans, and that is hosted on top of AWS. But I'm also really drawn to these projects now, and I think open source, how it's actually the model here is working out pretty well. There's another application I've been playing around with a Penpot. Which is another. It's a UI UX prototyping mockup tool. Sort of like Figma or Sketch SketchUp, but it's open source, and so it's built. It's basically pretty much a React application with a Java backend, but it is open source. You can check out you can run your own instance of it. They do give instructions for Docker instructions. If you just want to spin up a Docker container locally and run it off your computer, you could do that. So this is another thing I'm going to be introducing my students, because I do have to show some prototyping mockup tools, and traditionally I would use Adobe XD for that. But now that Adobe is trying to buy Figma, I don't know what the government's might be blocking that. I think that was the news today that they said
Really?
that they're building a case against Adobe buying out Figma.
They feel like what? That's antitrust?
Yeah, an antitrust case. So who knows if that's going to happen? But when that happened, Penpot got
Figma
a lot.
Really that big?
It's huge. Yeah, I think it's like 20 billion. I guess the price was $20 billion before the market went down. I think it's what the price that they were trying to buy it at.
That's crazy. Wow.
But and then what they're going to do with it, that does go through. They're just going to roll that into pretty much going to become Adobe XD Online. They're just going to merge the two together, and Adobe XD is going to become Figma. So that's what they're going to do.
You ready to jump ship on Figma? Is that what it is? And
well, it's interesting, but when that happened, I found out about Penpot because it got a lot of traction. Just by people talking about saying, "Oh, Figma is going to die. Adobe's just going to like make it bloated like they do everything else," which I do agree with. But the thing about the other applications that are open source, that they've gotten really, really good now, and it's interesting too the business models around this too, about making a company around open source, and there's a lot of, it seems like a lot of companies are succeeding with it.
Where it's like the application's open source, but you can pay us
for like pretty much like they build a business around hosting that service or that application that is available as open source. Because the majority of users don't want to host it themselves, don't want to deal with the complexity of that. Right. And looking at the code of Penpot, like I said, it's a JavaScript front end, but there is a Java back end to it that you have to make sure those two instances are hosted and make sure that it's working well together. Like I said, they do have a Docker image that will do that, but you would have to kind of deal with the scaling of that if you actually wanted to build something with that application. But just giving that option to run it either locally on your computer or to host it in your own instance on the cloud is great.
Yeah, because from I don't know, so many things. It reminds me a little bit of what Autodesk does with Fusion 360, which is it's free for non-commercial use. There's some features that are limited, right? And I mean, I know this is a little bit different because we're talking about open source versus like a freemium type model.
Yeah.
But it's free, and I think the advantage there goes if if you're a hobbyist that's doing CAD work, you'll know Fusion because it's the, more than like, and I know people would probably argue and say, no, I like this, this free alternative better than Fusion, but it's probably the most well-known, powerful CAD offering that's free. And then if you then say, oh, I'm out of the hobbyist department, I'm actually going to go to work and do CAD work. Well, what do you know? You know Autodesk now because
Yeah.
it was free. So it's like, well, you can, once you get in it, you're like, well, we could host this ourselves, but now we want the whole team to use it because we were just kind of running it as a skunk works project in our team and it was free and we could, but now the
Yeah.
whole company wants to use it. Well, we don't want the infrastructure cost, the maintenance cost around ourselves. Let's just buy the licenses, because I already know it. I already like this product, and especially if it's something like, hey, can you throw this up on the school's network? Sure, I can. And now the students start to use it. So yeah, that model of allowing you not to feel like you're locked in with a vendor lock-in, but also
Yeah.
say when you want it to be convenient, just pay us. And that also, I'm guessing that funds the continued, improvement of the application itself, right?
Yeah, it's smart from a business perspective, getting, especially from if you're offered the software for free or if there is a low cost student version of that, which Adobe does do, even though I don't know. I think, like I said, Adobe, I think charges students was about a little bit over $20 a month for the Creative Cloud, which for the amount of applications you get, I get the value of that, and I totally get that. But also, it feels like too I always try to not teach just software. And I wish that actually schools would kind of get away from almost being like not promoters, but being uh platform kind of centric about the applications they use, like being like using the Creative Cloud. There's programs like ours that are, centered around that. And because that's what the industry is telling us to do, saying like, oh yes, we want students coming out of our programs to know Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign or Adobe
Right.
XD or After
Right.
Effects, right? They want to know these platforms. So, but it's kind of like this incestuous kind of like, I don't know, thing that just kind of happens then where like you're just kind of promoting or just kind of building on top of something that I don't know. I don't like teaching students like, oh, hey, just this is the software. You need to know how to use it in order to be, successful being a designer. But if they just know good design theory, it doesn't really matter, what application they use. That's what I'm saying. Like that's why I promote in my classes GIMP and Inkscape and show that to them. I may not require them to use it like I use it, but when I'm doing demonstrations and if I need to modify an image or create do a quick little SVG file, I'll open up those applications instead just to expose them to a different application.
Right, because you want them to know what they're trying to do, not how I
Yeah.
do this in Photoshop or how I do
Yeah.
this in Illustrator. You
Yeah.
want them to know, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a vector drawing that then I use some blends or some gradients, and I'm gonna change these fonts and build this logo. This just you shouldn't have to only know one tool, right?
Yeah. So it's interesting. So what do you want to chat about?
It's a little different though too when you to think of other industries because there's not different table saws, right? I mean, there are,
Yeah.
but when it comes down to it, it's a blade spinning.
The tool's a tool. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not like, oh, no, I only know how to use this brand of hammer. No, it's a hammer. It's a hammer. It's a hammer. But when you get into software, yeah, Illustrator does things different than GIMP, or not GIMP. I'm sorry, Inkscape. Photoshop does things different than GIMP. Photoshop I think has adjustment layers. I don't think has GIMP gotten adjustment layers.
No,
yet?
I don't think so. No.
So
Yeah.
for sure, there's different scales of tools, and at that point, if you're gonna take a physical manufacturing, and those physical tools, it's like, well, do you know how to use a shop bot versus some other CNC, and maybe they're different because one has tool changes. Nope, I don't have a tool changer on this CNC. Well, that changes the whole way that your whole workflow, but still, it shouldn't change the fact that you know how to use a CNC to make something, right? Like it may be easier, it may require more manual work, but still you shouldn't feel like, well, I can only do this on one machine versus, I don't know how to do it if it's not Photoshop. Yeah. Like you say, you want to teach design theory. You don't want to teach how to use Photoshop.
Yeah.
Because those are different things. But I guess
Well,
I'm
I
saying,
understand.
like, I can see how it's hard to do
From
that.
a bit like a business, like a marketing or design business, like when they hire somebody, they're expecting them to know these tools. right? So they want them. They don't want to kind of bring these new employees in, have to teach them how to work with Photoshop layers.
Right. You should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they want somebody to know that they're expecting that, right? So that's.
But at least layers, like I know GIMP might not have adjustment layers, but pretty much any raster editing program has layers.
Yeah.
So you should understand the usefulness of layers.
Yeah.
And
And students and students are pretty good. Like when they come into our program now, like so coming out from high school, especially if they're creative and they're a little bit of a self-starter, they'll look for free software and they'll figure out
they'll
themselves.
know, yeah.
Like
and that's the best. That's
like,
who you.
Like
That's
one
who
of
you
the
want to hire.
one of the most popular applications I see that students know is Krita. The open source kind of painting tool.
Oh,
So it's primary for doing like illustrated painting work, like more like kind of it's primary pixel based with the brush tools that they have. But it seemed like the artists or kind of creative students I see coming in here, they know that because it's free and they download it and
so you're saying that
it works well.
That's all raster, right? I'm just taking a look at it.
Yes.
Quick.
I don't know if they have any I don't know if they have any vector tools built into it,
but not like a Photoshop as much as it is a paint program.
Painting application, yeah.
Yeah, which I mean, Photoshop is raster editing. This would be raster creation. Yeah. I should. The older kids just got Surfaces.
Oh, okay.
Surface Goes, not the Go laptops, but the Surface Go. And I saw one of them today doing her math, and the math application you can write on it if you have a screen that supports that, and she's there with the pen just writing on it. So I should check out Krita and see if that works well for them.
The tablet interface, like the pressure sensitivity, is supposed to be pretty good on the surfaces.
Yeah.
So for painting drawing tools, yeah.
But those, like you're saying, you're seeing students that are using these open source tools.
Well, I brought that up because like if students are faced with like, okay, they want to create something, they want to make something,
They'll find
it. They'll find an application, and then they'll figure it out themselves too. Like, and I'm just saying that I wish we as an academic institution did that and supported that a little bit more, promoted that a little more. You know what I mean?
Because the truth is, like, if you're hiring somebody to be a designer, and you have the option between someone who may not know Photoshop but has done what you described.
Yeah.
Who has found the open source, found GIMP, figured out how to do it with GIMP, because they couldn't afford the license. And then you have someone else who says, I know Photoshop because when I went to college, they taught me Photoshop. And that's it. That's the reason I know it. Like, I feel like if those are the two individuals, you really don't want the person who knows the Photoshop, because it may take you just a little bit longer to introduce that other designer to Photoshop and say, oh, look at what this tool can do. Oh, wow, now that I see what it can do, yeah, those would have been useful to have, but I didn't have it before. I still made it work because I could figure out how to do it, and I have the passion to learn and to accomplish it. You probably want the person, who doesn't necessarily know the application, but has the drive and the ability to figure out how to do it with the tools that they have.
The only thing I need, Tim,
What's that?
I need an application that can basically a no code application that students could just go in there, draw what they want their web page to look like, and it would just output beautiful HTML and CSS.
Just draw it.
They could just draw it, and and then they could just take that HTML and CSS and take it anywhere they want, and where they want to host their websites, or convert it into a theme or template. I don't know. But
have you heard of Microsoft Front Page?
A student brought that up to me. An older student who's taking my a student in one of my intro to web class. He's a good student. He's a good self starter because he's a former. I think he said he's former kind of IT technician, and then he's getting back into when he first got into IT. He was doing some like Fortran, COBOL programming, and he's just been the kind of an IT guy now, but he wants to kind of get back to. I think he's like early 40s, and he wants to get back to just doing design because that's kind of how I got. Just like me, I kind of got into technology, kind of around programming and design, and working on HTML and JavaScript. And so he brought up, oh, you remember Front Page? I was like, yes, I remember Front Page. It was revolutionary for the time until you actually took a look at the code and saw what it outputted.
Horrible.
You did not want to work with that application anymore. But it was great. It was revolutionary for when that came out.
Did you ever have to install like the front page extensions on a server?
Yep, yep.
I forget what they did. It was like
I
a bunch of
pushed
server-side
some.
includes or something, wasn't it? It was
It was
back in the
IIS.
day.
Yes, it was IIS extensions or something that you had to install on IIS.
Oh no, but we did it on we did it on Apache box.
Oh, I didn't do that. I was just like hosting like a Windows NT box or something.
Right,
like
but
that
you
and
could
pushed to it.
install some type of front page extension module for Apache so Apache could understand the HTML, because front page would throw in weird tags that were supposed to be server-side processed to bring in your templates, right?
Yep. Yeah. I know. So they did some crazy weird stuff. And it was like I said, it was really cool. Like it was I thought from getting into web development, I thought it was a really, really great tool. And that also I think that was the first time I started using Visual Basic Script, VB Script.
Okay, VB Script.
For doing some before ASP.NET. So doing a little bit of VB Script along with they actually had JScript too. Microsoft tried to co-opt JavaScript. Remember that? They tried to co-opt JavaScript by making JScript. I bought a book about that too. I thought, oh, this is gonna be the new thing, because it was like the next version of like VB Script, and I was like, no, never took off.
Not actually the next thing. No. No, and then what was the nice thing about front page was what you see was what you got. It just wasn't great, you know?
it was okay. Well, that was back in the day too, before CSS. We really had good CSS, and before browsers were able to render a page in the same way across all the browsers. We had to use tables. That was back in the day. We had to use tables for doing layout, and responsive design was definitely not a thought in anybody's mind.
No, I don't think anybody's thinking like, what if someone tried to view this webpage on their phone? We were like, on their phone with the wireless access protocol. I don't know if you remember that from back in the day, where you could have like
the WAP, where
special files that then would render a very simple menu.
Yeah. I never did anything practically with that, but I remember having an early one of those PC, one of those the Windows Phone, the early version of the Windows Phone. It was like the one that had like a sort of like the Windows version of a BlackBerry. Remember that one? It had like the keyboard. I forgot what it was called. It was a Windows Phone. It ran like a mobile version of Windows. It was basically modeled after the BlackBerry.
Yes, I kind of remember this.
And it was like a tablet, and that was kind of my first kind of like color graphical mobile web browsing experience using that device. I thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. I think I tried to bring up pages that I built just to see what they would render on them, but I never got into like designing specifically for that.
Right. Yeah.
Good times.
Back in the day, back when front page.
Where has time gone, Tim?
Ruled the world. Yeah.
We've gotten so old now. We can reminisce about the good old days of table-based design HTML.
I remember that. There was no box model, right?
And thinking about that too, I'm thinking about, because going back to, I wish there was a tool. I wish there was an open source tool like we're talking about PenPot or like Figma that could just give you output out great HTML. And it's interesting how we've had HTML CSS for
though?
Well, it's interesting. PenPot actually does have a way to, you could like per component. It can't do your whole project.
I feel like designers look at generated HTML the way I look at generated code, and you're like, okay, it accomplishes the job, but it's not exactly efficient. It's not easy to maintain. There's problems with it, right?
And for Figma, there are plugins. There are plugins and exporters you could do that. I haven't taken a look at the code because I haven't really played with them not because I've almost been playing with PenPot. But with PenPot, you can actually see the HTML and CSS because it is a React application. So if you are, let's say, prototyping, a mobile screen, and you want to know, let's say you have this text view with maybe some buttons on it, with some text, and you want to see, okay, I want to try to recreate that on the web, and I want to see the HTML, CSS, where you can actually see the code and how that's being generated. Now, the CSS is not too bad. Some of the HTML, how it's using the class names, and it just looks a little bit messy, a little bit verbose, I think. So it's almost there, and I think eventually it should get there, where like you should be able to, let's say, prototype a mobile or web application in these applications, then output out HTML, CSS templates.
Right, and you're just getting like the structure. You're getting like, a sidebar here, it's a div tag, or it's a section tag, or
which that's what Webflow is doing. Webflow.
Right.
But it's a locked in system, and it's like I hate that. I hate the fact it's like a locked in system, and like that's why I thought about teaching that to my students.
But Webflow would give you you'd actually build the whole page, right? Like you put the content.
You build the whole site.
Well.
Yeah, it has a database back into it.
It feels like what you're talking about doing in Figma.
It's a content management
more
system
like.
Too.
Yeah, it feels like with PenPot and Figma, you're more like, I just want the structure.
Yeah.
that then is a template. But Webflow doesn't actually give you a template ever, right? It just
You can. I never tried. I know you can export your data out. I never tried that. But just
But
the
I mean,
fact that
even a pages, do you like duplicate a page?
yeah,
Does Webflow have the notion of templates, and then you just fill your content
it's
in?
pretty much a
Okay.
CMS. It's a content
Okay.
management system with a really great UI, like a design interface built on top of it. So
Okay.
you can build out your pages, your templates, and you can just add in your content, your images, and but the thing is, you're locked in that platform. It hosts your website.
Yeah.
So I hate that because it just feels like, okay, once you build that, you can get your code out. They do have an export, but then you're going to have to convert that to something else and just
Because they're just
a mess.
exporting the HTML. So
Yeah.
you use it to create a static site that then now you have to maintain a different way.
Yeah. And the older I get, like I said, we talked about last week, the older I get, the less I want to be either dependent on certain libraries that I feel like I have to be part of the maintenance of that. Where if a library gets updated, I had to make sure my application is compatible with that update, and when I'm doing my package updates, but also when I'm thinking about hosting providers, I want to have some flexibility to, if I say there's some issue I have with that hosting provider, either from a cost or from a technical standpoint, from a reliability, I want to be able to feel like I can move it someplace else without having too much effort, too much work.
For sure. All right. Well, that was good. I don't even know how we get all there.
That's what we do, Tim. We just
I
just
don't
go.
even-
We just
I don't even remember how we
ramble. I don't
started
know.
that one.
Just-
Okay, so I tweeted something yesterday, day before. I don't know, a couple days ago. I was working at some code. Let me ask this: do you use immutable objects in whatever languages that you're using? Right?
I know what a mutable object is. I
Or
can
like a value object. You can't change it, right? Like once you create it, it's not going to change. Now, there's some libraries in the PHP land specifically around the request and response of HTTP. So this may be interesting for your web design class, right?
Oh, let's also qualify before you get there. With you talk about mutable objects, talk about the keys of the objects shouldn't change, but the values can change within inside of them.
Well, I'm saying that the object itself says once I'm created, I'm not going to change.
So the structure, the shape of the object does not change, but the value that it holds can change. Or are you saying the value can't change
I'm
either?
saying the instance of the object, not the class structure, right?
But
the concrete instance?
Could I change the value of the properties of the instance?
No, you should not.
Oh, okay. All right. So you're really talking about
Yep. This is an object that is not going to change. It represents like at this. If you have a copy of this thing, it's not going to change. And there's value there. And at first, sometimes it seems inconvenient, but there's value there, specifically around handling web requests, right? If I, for example, say, oh, I need to pass this off to some other code to check to see if this is authenticated. Because a PSR7 gives you this model of a server request interface. Has all of, here's all of your headers, here's the body, here's everything. If I want to pass it off to some other code and another method or a class or something and say, hey, take a look at it and tell me, is it authenticated? And I'm trusting that code's going to say, maybe look at the headers, maybe look for a bearer token, and tell me something about it. But as soon as I pass it off, if that object is mutable, then I have to say, did you change it? Did you do more than look at it? Because I'm going to want to use it. So then it's like, well, maybe I make a copy of it, or maybe I re-architect how I think and I say, well, I'm not going to give you a request. I'm going to extract the authorization header and just give you the header. But that's not great, because what if today authentication is a header and tomorrow it's something else, right? It'd be nice for me just to be able to say, here's the web request, other code, you tell me something about it, but trust that you can't tamper with it. So that's why we have, that's why the interfaces for a request and a response in PSR7 for the PHP libraries that implement it, because those are just interfaces, that there's a bunch of different implementations, but that's why they declare that it needs to be an immutable object. So it's like, well, then how do you change it? Because if you're building up a request, you may want to say, oh, I want it exactly like this, but I want to add a header to it. And you can't. It's immutable. You can't add a header to it. Well, most of those objects introduce this notion of a with method. So I can say, hey, give me this request, the request that I have with header, and I'll give you the header, and you'll give me back, what do you give me back? A completely new object, right? So I didn't tamper with the original one. I can modify it all I want, but I'm not going to modify the original one. So I'm not going to change the object maybe other code has and is relying on it. I'm going to mutate it myself, and I'm going to have another copy. And if I want to pass that to somebody else, I can pass that to somebody else and know that they can't change it. They may be able to make a new one from it, but they can't change it. So that's the value of the immutability. In terms of testing, you can rely on the fact that, oh, I gave it to some other application or some other code. I don't have to test that when it comes back. It's been modified. It hasn't been modified. But when you're building up requests, you have some weird syntax where you're like, request equals request with header. And you're basically assigning, because if you're just building it up, you're like, I don't care. I want to build up a request here. Because it's immutable, I have to keep assigning the output of the with method to a variable that's probably the same thing as the variable I'm changing. Because in my context, I made it. I just want to use these convenience functions to build it up. And we also have a library that has immutable collections. And there's value to that too, right? Because you can rely on it. Yep, I passed that collection off to somebody else. They didn't change it. It's an immutable collection. Maybe it's an immutable collection I can also only iterate through once. Whatever. I know, the state of it when I pass it hasn't been changed. All the time. I'll do like collection map, and I'll put my fancy map function in to change some of the values of the collection.
Yeah.
And I will forget to reassign it to the variable. So I'll be doing absolutely nothing, right? And I'll be like, well, why didn't it change the values? Because the collection's immutable and I need to reassign it. So I tweeted out the other day that I wish, I can't be the only one that would like this. And if you know how PHP works, we use I don't know if anyone wants to call it the arrow thing. It's the thing that says I want to invoke a method on an object, right? So it's that dash greater than.
Because you guys don't like the dot.
Don't like the dot. No, we are not going to. What do you think we are? Java or C?
Something that makes sense.
One of those languages? No, we have an arrow function that I'm almost certain every developer, when they read it out loud, and when I say like request with header, if I was going to read it, I'd probably be like request dot with header, right? I'm not going to be like arrow with header, but anyway.
Okay. Oh, okay. Let's talk about from a development experience. Okay, from a visual aspect of it, from a syntax, I don't mind it. I hate typing it.
Oh, okay.
Is there?
And I like that my IDE, I have ligatures turned on, so
Yeah,
you don't see
you
a
just press-
dash arrow. You see
just-
an arrow,
You
right?
just press one character and it just outputs out.
Well, no, it's still the two characters.
You still got you got to press two keystrokes when you have
instead
to
of
call a method when you could just do a dot.
Yep, two whole characters. And but what I do, as if I do that, I hit the dash and it starts auto completing. I just say yes to do the thing that you obviously don't need. But anyway, you do the arrow and it just visually looks nice. It puts them together, so you don't see like dash greater than. You see something that looks like an arrow. But instead of having to do like request equals request arrow with header, what if I just this is my dream. I've thrown it out there, got some reactions. We'll see. Why not just do request instead of a dash greater than, an equals greater than, which would say evaluate this as if I'm invoking the method, but what everything to the right of the equals greater than evaluate assign back to the thing that I'm calling it on.
Is that a new operator?
Yeah.
Are you suggesting a new operator?
Yeah,
for
yeah. I
PHP?
think I'm trying to think of what the name would be. Would this be the invoke assign operator? Because we have operators like this already. We have a plus equals, which means just take what's to the right and add it to whatever's on the left. We have a dot equals, which says just take what's on the right
Tim.
and concatenate it. So
Tim,
now
I think I'm envisioning this. I'm liking this. I'm getting inspired by this.
All right, all right.
So I'm visualizing an equal sign and then a right angle bracket or greater than sign, depending on
greater than. Yep.
And that is your new operator. We should call it the Lytle operator.
Because
if you just rotate it 9 degrees, it looks like two eyes and then a beard.
Okay.
And everyone called. You can't call the Tim. You could call it the Tim, but I think Lytle's actually kind of a cooler name for it.
The Lytle operator. I like it. We have the spaceship operator, which is a less than equals greater than.
Yeah.
But no, I like that. I mean, I think it would be the invoke assignment operator or something like that. But I don't know, because I feel I've been thinking about it. I feel like it would make things easier because it probably wouldn't make things easier. There's tedium with the whole I have to do request equals request with header, right? And this would reduce the tedium there. It's also, if you want to call it visual noise or something like that, I look through it, I have to see the assignment. If I understood that the equals greater than was the assigning invocation operator, right? I'd be like, oh, I can see what we're doing there, and it's not two variables right next to each other. You're like, why is it duplicated request? Oh, that's why it's duplicated. Would I remember to do it? Because that's the big thing. I don't remember to do it, right? I'll call like request with header, and I won't assign it back to itself, and I'll be like, why is my test failing? Well, it's because you never actually assigned it. You created an object and returned it, and it wasn't assigned to anything. Would I remember to use that instead of dash greater than? Would I remember to use equals greater than? Maybe not. Maybe not. I'd probably be still in the same place where I forget it most of the time. Would I accidentally use equals greater than when I didn't mean it and start overriding the values of variables and changing their types because it's a dynamic language? For sure. For sure. I would totally introduce more bugs with this. But I think it's a cool idea. And if getting a cool idea into a language isn't what I'm here for as a developer, then I don't know what is, right?
Right. So. It kind of reminds me of, which I don't use a language that, but I've seen this like when I've just seen Go examples with the colon equals for like assignment.
Do they have
operator.
Go like has a colon equals operator.
Like colon equals for just make sure I can describe it rightly. Used to assign a value to a variable or to update the value of an existing. How does it differ? I think that's just basically just.
Oh, that's like a null coalescing.
Well, it's not like a null coalescing, but it's. I know what you're talking about, the colon question mark. Or I guess from what I'm used to within.
Oh, it's for declaration.
Yeah.
So you don't have to declare the type because the type is implied.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know.
It just made me think about that once you're like describing this new operator that you're coming up with. So.
I like it. So, but in the immutable side of things, do you use immutable objects like in PHP, specifically around the request and response? They're immutable. There's a lot of value there. It may take you a moment if you're just being introduced to it to see why the immutability is so important in that context. I think I've described that.
Like,
but
I know
the stuff that you do.
I understand.
Do you have immutable objects?
Not necessarily. The one thing I would want to enforce, like that's why I brought up you define a being as immutable as in the shape is immutable, like basically the type of that object.
The types. But then we can just have strongly typed objects.
So I guess because that's what I use all the time. So I use that, but I don't, in a sense, I haven't really, made like immutable object that doesn't change. I don't know. I have to think about that. Maybe I have.
Yeah, we use that a lot for value objects, where it's like this is just going to represent a value, and it should never change. Yeah. It shouldn't change on somebody because it represents either money or maybe it represents like a name or an address. It's like we should not be changing that in memory. Right? Like if you're going to change it, you're going to replace it with a new one. But you don't want to be like, oh, how do I update this part of this thing that it's really... No, you don't update part of it. It is, in its own, it is the thing. It's this idea of currency as a value and a currency type, right? You're not going to just change it and be like, oh, I didn't mean $1, I meant £1. No, you're going to make a new one, and you're going to replace the value. You're not going to mutate, or not, I shouldn't say mutate because you could mutate the value, but you're not going to change the actual value of this instance of this variable. Nope, it is what it is. You'll have to reassign it completely, and so we use a lot of that in terms of value objects, and I think I have been
getting back into Android development with Kotlin. I'm loving the type system with Kotlin, and it's just the fact of like how it really enforces a strongly typed system, gives you some flexibility. But it really tries to, show you these type issues at compile time, but also still provides you good safety for after compile time when the application is being run. But primarily just trying to enforce immutable objects or immutable variables, in a sense. That's mostly what I've been using.
Variables that can't be changed.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, we'll dig a little bit maybe deeper into that because you're learning Kotlin. Is there? I'm wondering. Like, I see the value in the term in what we do.
From a server side,
I've not really thought hard about that in terms of compile languages, but I think there's still value there.
I'd have to look at it. I know.
All right. Well, I don't know. It felt like a good show.
Another Friday, Tim. Another Dev Friday. Another show.
Yeah.
Maybe next week we'll actually be on time.
Maybe. And then it's important also to note that if we were sponsored by PHP Tech. There might be a QR code up in the top corner with the discount code. I mean, And if you're listening to this podcast, you wouldn't. I mean,
my.
listening's always the podcast is always better being listened to. That's for sure.
I'm not getting paid for this.
If we were sponsored, there would be a no. I mean, I know there's a QR code in the top corner right now. I'm just showing you what it would look like if it was sponsored. To be very clear that we're not sponsored by PHP Tech, and I'm not, talking about the tickets ending in 2 weeks for early bird. But maybe that's helpful to somebody. I don't know.
So I'm curious, how long have you had that image like loaded up in your display? Like,
we'll leave the stream going for a while.
Do you show that image like on like a Zoom calls? You just kind of pop that up and just that's like
actually
in Zoom advertisement.
It's a studio. It's a Restream thing. I just discovered it while we were in the show. They've got like QR codes off to the side. I'm like, I can just grab this link from over here and I can just press a button. It's gonna pop up on the screen. So for those that have stayed this long, just so you know, if you think that we plan any of this, I didn't tell Mark any of this, did I, Mark?
No, where you going with it?
I thought it'd be fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yes, to be clear, they're giving me no money.
Well, I'm assuming since you're speaking your keynote, I'm assuming they're paying for your travel and everything, right?
Yes, they will cover the flight and the hotel and all that and that jazz. In fact, I do believe somebody tweeted that if they could crash in my hotel room, they would buy the ticket. And you got 2 weeks to buy that ticket. I'm telling you, the PHP people are fun.
I would need a deep sponsor discount for how much is this PHP Tech? I think
you need a deep sponsor discount. Tell me how much I need to get this discounted for.
What is this? Where's the pricing here? I mean, register now. Tickets on sale. What is the early bird? Actually, it's not that bad. Actually,
no, it's not. It is one.
Well, how many days is it?
3 days. It's a 3-day conference. Yep.
May
PHP Tech is one of the.
One of the
most well-known.
When you were starting to do your little advertisement there at the beginning, I did take a look at the schedule, and it does look like they have some interesting.
Oh, you did.
Talks.
You looked at the schedule.
Well, while you were doing your advertisement for this, I had to get a little background information.
I was not doing an advertisement.
What our show was.
It clear that we were not sponsored by them. I feel like in the history of our podcasts,
how many people go to it?
We have not been sponsored by a lot of people. We were not sponsored by Get Barley. How about that? How about that? The world's smallest content management system,
or the world's.
Well, I say that because like the whole thing was about injecting bits of content into static templates. Remember?
Yeah.
If I remember
correctly,
they had
something cool. Yeah, I like that.
It was a really cool idea.
Yeah. I thought it was a good system. Yeah.
Like it was like take a static site and make parts of it dynamic by injecting just this little. I mean, it was a cool idea. But like it's like a micro. What do you want to say? A micro CMS. So how many people? I don't know the ticket sales now. I do know that to give some of the history of PHP Tech, this is going to be the first time that it's back, and maybe we should just talk about this next week on the podcast. But anyway, this is going to be the first time it's back.
Since there is one more week after that for the early bird bird special, yeah.
So, and I'm not saying that there's a competition between the speakers because we all have these discount codes. I'm not saying it's a competition, but obviously there is. Because you get a little. This is my personal.
So it's pretty much for pride saying you brought this many people into using your code.
Yep.
Wait, how much is the discount if I use that code with the early bird?
I don't know.
Any discount?
I think it's you'd have to look at. Yes, there's a discount for that. I'm sure. I'm pretty sure it's just a flat percentage off. I don't know if this is going to really work because you have the live thing. Oh, is the live thing over it?
Yeah, it won't pick up the QR code.
But it wouldn't be on the stream. It wouldn't be there.
Wouldn't be there. Okay, well, I'll have to watch the stream back. Like
what are you seeing? You're seeing a $600 early bird ticket price. Yeah, it's $575 with my discount code.
Oh, okay,
so save $25 off. Right. But no, you were asking how big. Well, this is the first time it's been in tech for 6 years or 5. I don't know how many. I'll have to do the math.
Mm-hmm.
But they moved out of. This is the first time to be in Chicago. They moved out of this hotel because it had grown to be a little bit bigger than this hotel could handle. but moving it also was difficult because moving it, you lost attendees. So it was like, because we moved it, we lose attendees, but we couldn't do more there because we were kind of at our capacity. So I'm
Tim,
glad that it's back in Chicago. I'm hoping that we'll see about 250, 300 people there.
One thing that I didn't bring up the show because I'm trying not to do it, but I was kind of, we could talk later about how
we're still live, right?
It's okay. It's fine. I don't care. It's starting to be the season again for me wanting to look for a new job. That becomes like a yearly theme at one point when we have our conversation. So I could
get far enough down.
I could sell this to my wife saying, it's a job opportunity. I could like talk to companies, right? But then I have to ask myself, do I want to work for a PHP company?
You do. I mean, run 70% of the web. So 78%, I don't remember. But so this is what we should do. This should be a topic for next week. We should talk about how you'll find a job.
What are the opportunities for a front end developer to go to?
Actually,
I'm sure there are a lot. Actually, probably are a lot of opportunities.
Oh yeah, at a PHP conference for sure. Because PHP JavaScript, have you done Vue? Vue's hot in the PHP community because of how well it was embraced by the.
I was going to ask you that because we should save that for next week because I have been looking at Vue because I was comparing some of the frameworks for what I'm going to be introducing to. So I talked briefly about it with my students this week.
Yeah,
basically it's the CS framework. It kind of looking at it, it feels kind of like an Angular, but not as restrictive as Angular. But how it kind of works, like from a client side, it kind of feels like that. So yeah, I could be into that.
I know my.
But why is the PHP why are they tied to Vue?
I think it's because it's so embraced by the Laravel kind of sub community. Is my gut, but what the client side devs tell me on our team is that they do like Vue a lot more than React.
Well, even though React doesn't like to call themselves a framework, it is a framework.
Yeah.
That if you want to build a React application, you have to build a React application. The one about Vue, it's pretty much it's a JavaScript library that you then implement on your pages, and it doesn't really matter.
Gotcha.
You don't have to use it as a framework.
So you have more freedom in how
it's more flexible. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. I'm obviously like I understand the concepts of what we're doing, but I kind of understand the concepts in the idea of like I understand the concepts of what Angular was trying to do years ago.
Yeah.
And what Vue and React do with a model that is updated and refreshed, and we redraw and we bind components. But when it gets more detailed than that, I don't have a great understanding. But maybe what we'll do is I'll tease a little bit of the keynote. Because no. So this is what I'm working on as I write the keynote. Man, this is gonna be fun, and a post podcast that people are gonna, if they watch this far into the.
It's like let go of ownership. No, he's not talking about the Go language.
Yes, let go of ownership. Yeah. Also, not a talk on copyleft licenses, which one might also see. Like the GPL. Like let go of ownership, you can't run your code, or
it's true.
Everybody does, or whatever. Yeah. However, not talking that either. But part of what I'm going to try to do is weave in a little bit of how tech specifically impacted my career into telling a story about how we as developers and just people could benefit by challenging the way that we look at the world, and almost saying we can change our point of view to accomplish something different. And because we, I don't want to give too much away on it, but that's like the direction I'm going. And that, just based on what you're saying about, going to a conference to help your career. Yeah. I mean, I'll say being at tech had a significant impact on my career. And the truth is I took a job to get there.
And that
was
is
one of the reasons.
Yeah, and I do know that, like, finding new employment opportunities, the best way is to know somebody.
Yeah.
So to make those connections, personal connections, because then when you see that company's hiring, then you could hit up the person, ask them about that, and then possibly give you a referral.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. And the stream now. There you go, bonus people that watched all the way to the end here.